Week 9's almost done, but it's time to get a quick, early look at the waiver wire for Week 10. We're going to be looking at those prospects you might be looking at when it comes to pick up those players this week. But before we dig in, you need to click that subscribe button right now because we're going to go deep on the waiver wire all week long. We're going to use these videos to help you set your lineups, and we're doing deep dives on all the trending players so you can get a good idea of what that player's about, see the advanced analytics, and make a decision off that player's situation. Click that button. Stop missing out. Ric Flair's watching. You do not want to disappoint him. First player we're looking at today, Quentin Johnston. He's back. He's back from injury. Back in a big way. 4 catches, 118 yards, 1 touchdown, 5 targets. He's getting a lot of volume. He's been good this year. Maybe a little bit up and down, a little bit streaky, but on the back end of your bench, playing with your lineups, that's something you're probably going to want compared to the rest of the wide receivers you're looking at off the waiver wire, because now we're going into Week 10 and things are getting kind of slim. Quentin Johnston's back. Maybe he was rostered throughout this time, but he's also available in a lot of waiver wires, considering during this time he was not scoring fantasy points. He hasn't been productive since Week 3, so you might be able to get a crack at him going into Week 10. Joshua Palmer. He's rostered in a lot of leagues considering Quentin Johnston was out during that time. He hasn't really been hitting. He got you 10 fantasy points in Week 7, but Week 9, 14.3 PPR fantasy points, 4 targets in this matchup, but we got that touchdown, 2 balls caught, 63 yards. We're getting volume. He's a wide receiver that's always going to give you a crack at production on any given Sunday. I would rather have Quentin Johnston. He's emerging more. But Joshua Palmer, if I'm in a deeper league, I'll take a look at him. Taysom Hill is going to be in a big spot coming up because Chris Olave just got hurt. The running backs are decimated for the Saints, and they're using him a lot in the offense. He's getting carries, he's getting targets, he's getting everything, honestly. And Taysom Hill's going to get the workload. If something happens to Alvin Kamara, that's even more workload for Taysom Hill. He is in a spot here where the Saints are going to have to ride him a lot going forward, and compared to the other tight ends, he's probably going to be one of the most consistent fantasy options among that position group. Ray Davis had that big catch for a touchdown today, and that really helped his fantasy production. Scored 17 PPR fantasy points. He's a guy, if you watch this video, you know he's rostered on your team or at least in your league. But if he's sitting there on waivers, he's a good 1B running back. He can give you spotty production like this. You look at the last 4 games, 18, 11, 2, 17 PPR fantasy points. Sharing the backfield with James Cook, giving you the opportunity to get you some fantasy points while you do have a handcuff running back. I call that a handcuff plus. That's what Ray Davis is. Ray McCloud. Drake London went down with a hip injury. Ray McCloud is a wide receiver we've been paying attention to throughout the season because in random games, he gets a lot of targets. He is getting a lot of volume. He's always running a lot of routes. Darnell Mooney will get a bump, but he should be rostered. Kyle Pitts should be rostered. Ray McCloud's the guy on the waiver wire that should get a bump up and an opportunity going forward. Jalen Tolbert. CeeDee Lamb went out with an injury, came back in, and we're going to pay attention to him throughout the week. Some guys come back in, and next thing you know, they're missing practices, and next thing you know, they might be out. So we're going to pay attention to him, but Jalen Tolbert's still getting targets. We got 6 targets in this matchup. We scored 10.9 PPR fantasy points, and we scored a touchdown. We're getting volume here. It's up and down. His fantasy production has been up and down all season long. He wasn't the most productive wide receiver on Sunday, but still something to note with some of these matchups coming up, considering he's running a lot of routes. He's in on a lot of snaps. He's giving you some opportunity. Ja'Tavion Sanders, and he's a sneaky play. This is more for deep leagues because there's plenty of tight ends to roster, and you shouldn't roster more than 1 tight end on your fantasy league. You should save that roster spot for an upside running back or an upside play at wide receiver and then play the matchups if something happens to your main tight end. But just look at these numbers. Since Week 5, 5 targets. Week 6, 7 targets. Week 7, 6 targets. 1 target in Week 8, 5 targets in Week 9. We're starting to get more workload. It's not just today. I mentioned him in the Xavier Legette video earlier this week that you need to look at JT Sanders because we were looking at this passing game. And we looked at Jalen Coker too, but JT Sanders has been emerging over these last few weeks. We should see him get more targets and more opportunities during the back half of the season. He should get a run. He's not going to be a dependable tight end because the Carolina Panthers are not dependable. But if I'm in a 14-team league, 16-team league, I'm hurting at tight end, here's a guy to look at. Noah Brown starting to get more work. 12 targets in his last 2 games, getting work in this offense. He's also scored 27 PPR fantasy points in his last 2 games, and he should emerge getting this workload going forward, and he should be getting opportunities. Remember, he was traded, and it was late, and now we had to ramp up, and now we're starting to get our opportunities in this offense. This is a wide receiver to pay attention to for the rest of the season. Mack Hollins. Keon Coleman went down with an injury. If he's out for some time, Mack Hollins is going to get those deep contested targets, what Keon Coleman was getting, and that could allow him to be productive in fantasy. He scored a touchdown, saw 5 targets in this matchup. He's getting air yards in some of these matchups where they got to push the pace. 6 targets in week 4, 6 targets in week 5. Amari Cooper will eventually be back out there, but Mack Hollins is going to be that contested deep threat, kind of like what Keon Coleman was, and has spurts of production off and on throughout his career with random teams, and he deserves to have that right now with the Buffalo Bills. I think with every team he's been with, he's been a waiver wire dandy. This might be his time to be a waiver wire dandy with the Buffalo Bills. Nick Westbrook is a wide receiver to pay attention to, because DeAndre Hopkins is gone, and when they got to throw the rock, it's going towards him. He's got 10 targets in his last 2 games, 14 in his last 3. We got 16 fantasy points today, and if the volume is rocking and targets are going downfield, Westbrook could have a day for you. Cedrick Wilson, Mason Tipton, the wide receivers for the Saints. Wilson went out in this game but came back in, so pay attention to him health-wise. You got MVS out there too. It's just that Chris Olave had that concussion. You know he's going to be out. So if you need something at wide receiver and you're hurting that bad, pick up one of these guys. They're not tremendously talented, but if you want to chase some volume and get lucky, one of these wide receivers could hit for you off the Saints. Emari Demercdado and Trey Benson. James Conner went out with an injury, he came back in, and during that time they were splitting the workload. Emari Demercdado had that big touchdown that was very impactful, very explosive. Trey Benson's been looking explosive as well. If he's going to be out for a long period of time, I like them both. Emari Demercdado is getting more of the money work out of the backfield, a lot of the targets. We saw that the last time James Conner had to go out for a few plays, so that's something to pay attention to. Trey Benson's got a lot of burst, a lot of pop, but again, Demercdado is a running back that you still need to pay attention to. Mike Gesicki went off with 27 PPR fantasy points. The week prior, 12. He needs to be rostered in all leagues at this point. He's starting to get consistent. We're starting to get good volume from week to week, and this was a good matchup for him against the Raiders. 6 targets, 5 balls caught, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Gesicki is good around the end zone, and if T. Higgins is out, you're more likely going to want to fire up Mike Gesicki because he's going to get those money targets. Demarcus Robinson scored a touchdown today. He's getting volume. Puka Nacua is out, but still he's getting volume with both those wide receivers in. When both those wide receivers are on the field, they got to account for them so he can sneak past the covers a few times each game, which could be money targets. That being said, Demarcus Robinson is a guy to pay attention to off waivers. Blake Corum, Kyron Williams is on the field getting a lot of workload, and that's going to matter eventually. That twig's going to snap. That's going to happen. And if that does happen, Blake Corum's going to get a lot of that workload with Ronnie Rivers. So you may want him as a stash. If I have Kyron Williams, I want Blake Corum, especially now for the rest of the season, because he's getting a ton of work. And you know what happens to running backs. This is not a Kyron Williams thing. This is not a Blake Corum thing. This is a lot of touches, a lot of snaps, and running backs go down. And this is an offense that can really push the fantasy production to their running back, and Blake Corum's a back that you're going to want stashed just in case something happens to Kyron Williams. But those are the players we're looking at right now. It's a quick early look. We'll have more on the waiver wire, especially on Tuesday, where we go 20 plus deep at wide receiver, 20 plus deep at running back, and then we do it all again on Wednesday. Click that subscribe button. Stop missing out. I'll catch you on the next video.